We are under 40 days away from the return of NBA basketball, and the Oklahoma City Thunder are coming in hungry off the heels of last season when they became both the youngest one seed in league history and the youngest team to ever win a playoff series. This summer, OKC EVP and GM Sam Presti made two massive moves, acquiring a couple of the best glue guys in the NBA in Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein, adding them to an already stacked young roster that is looking to contend in 2024-25, but the Thunder weren't the only team to make a splash this summer. After 5 seasons, Paul George decided it was time to leave the secondary but still bright lights of LA that shined on the Clippers and signed as a free agent with the 76ers, who look like they may have constructed the best roster that Joel Embiid has had around him in his career as he chases that elusive conference finals appearance and hopefully beyond. But what if I told you that just one choice over 5 years ago would have made none of these things that I just told you even a possibility? That one different decision could have put the NBA on an entirely different multiversal timeline from what we know today, where that era of the Kawhi and PG13 Clippers never occurs, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander didn't become the face of the franchise, superstar for the Thunder, and even more changes from the landscape of the NBA as we know it today. Join me today as I ponder the question, what if the Thunder traded Paul George to the Raptors? Let's rewind the clock and go back to the night in question that set all these events in motion to really understand where that league-altering fork in the road took place. Before any trades went down, it was already a massive night for the NBA, with highly anticipated rookie Zion Williamson making his NBA Summer League debut in a number 1 versus number 2 pick matchup between Zion and his former Duke teammate RJ Barrett. Zion was let loose after the opening tip with the entire NBA world watching. Also, Kenrich Williams was here. The at the time viewed hopeful future face of the NBA had an immediate impact with a couple of backboard shattering dunks, but what most people remember was his annihilation of Kevin Knox on this massive slam.
Tapped it out to Knox, Zion rips it, punches it home!
Unfortunately, the game not too soon after that eradication of Knox was brought to a screeching halt as an earthquake hit the Thomas and Mack Center near downtown Vegas, but this was just the calm before the storm of the league's shifting earthquake that hit the NBA News airways at 10:55 PST.
Leonard had the world holding its breath, and when he finally made a choice, things escalated so quickly. The breaking news from overnight, the Woj bomb happened at 1:50 a.m. Eastern Time. Sources tell Adrian Wojnarowski that the Clippers are making a trade for Paul George with OKC. It'll clear the path for Kawhi Leonard to sign with the Clippers on a 4-year, $141 million contract.
The Clippers had shocked the NBA by not only being able to pry Kawhi Leonard away from the defending champion Raptors and denying a Big Three team-up for their cross-hallway rival Lakers alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis, but they were also able to pair the claw with Paul George coming off top 3 finishes in MVP and Defensive Player of the Year voting last season. In a city known for gambling like Vegas, the Clippers had pushed all of their chips in the middle of the table after giving up every first-round pick and swap that they could, along with a high-level rookie guard in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to OKC, in exchange for Paul George, which helped them also seal a deal to sign Kawhi Leonard soon after. The Thunder were coming off their 3rd straight first-round exit that was capped off by Damian Lillard sending OKC home on this shot that felt massive at the time, but little did we know Dame was waving goodbye to this era of Thunder basketball. But how did this blockbuster trade that we know today come together? It was recently reported by Paul George himself on his own podcast, Podcast P, that a text exchange between the two superstars after the 2019 finals really set things into motion.
Text Y. Congrats, bro. What you gonna do? What you mean? Like, what you gonna do? Like, you comfortable there? You good there? I'm like, yeah, bro. Like, I just resigned. Like, yeah, we gonna try to do this next year. Like, I hear people trying to get out of there. That was the initial start of that conversation.
Both Kawhi and George were on the same page about wanting to join forces. The only questions remaining were how it would happen and where the two would wind up as teammates together. According to PG, he and Kawhi had 2 destinations in their sights, with the Clippers obviously on one side, and on the other side was the Raptors, with Kawhi in that scenario returning to Toronto to defend the Raptors' 2019 title with a newly acquired PG13 by his side. Soon after the players began talking, the discussions moved their way up the ladder as it quickly became more than just small talk and tires being kicked between Thunder EVP and GM Sam Presti and the Raptors' president of basketball operations Masai Ujiri in an attempt to get a potential deal done to help the Raptors retain Kawhi and keep him away from either LA team. We know the final offer that the Clippers would slide across the table towards OKC when they proposed a deal that would send 4 unprotected first-round picks, 1 protected first, and 2 first-round pick swaps to OKC along with NBA vet Danilo Gallinari and some random skinny guard out of Kentucky named Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. We'll get to him later, but needless to say, the Clippers had made their all-in move.
All in.
I'll call.
That's insane.
I have good cards.
Well, Toby, I went all in on the first hand, so doesn't that tell you that I might have good cards too? So don't be stupid, just take it back. Flip them. You really screwed that up. Wow.
We may never know what Ujiri and the Raptors' best offer to the Thunder was for George, but according to reports by Bruce Arthur of the Toronto Sun, OKC did propose a deal to Toronto where the Thunder would receive Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, who were both 24 years old at the time, along with 4 unprotected first-round picks in exchange for the Thunder sending Paul George and Russell Westbrook north to join Kawhi on the defending champion Raptors. According to both Arthur and Woj, Ujiri balked at the rumored OKC offer and felt that the Raptors were being used as trade leverage so that the Thunder could squeeze every last drop of trade assets away from the Clippers in exchange for George. As well, Toronto also had some skepticism about taking on Russell Westbrook's then 4-year, $171 million contract. But what if Masai Ujiri didn't say no? What if the Raptors brass signed off on the then rumored trade offer from the Thunder and the Clippers trade never happened? What if a counteroffer was sent back to OKC and Presti accepted it? What sort of alternate reality or alternate timeline does that leave us in now compared to where these teams find themselves going into the 2024-25 NBA season? I can understand the Raptors and Ujiri's logic for balking at the idea of giving up Pascal Siakam right after he was coming off winning the NBA's Most Improved award, along with Fred VanVleet, who both played a vital role for the Raptors in the finals. Both players were also on absolute bargain contracts, and finally, Toronto would still need to add on 4 unprotected picks in that trade if they wanted to get Paul George and Russell Westbrook. The thing with that trade, it doesn't even work in the trade machine. I'm no mathematician by any means, but I can definitely see how the Raptors adding over $70 million in salary while only just under $11 million in salary going back to the Thunder might be a problem. I figured I would have someone take a look at it, and luckily a friend of mine is an NBA cap expert, John Hamm, who helped me with some basic addition and different NBA CBA rules I would need to follow to make this fake trade legal. After that, I ventured into the trade machine and tried to find what I felt like it was a pretty fair compromise of a deal that I don't think either team would feel like they were getting robbed by. So for the sake of this video, let's just say we have a deal.
I'll make that deal. How about you bitch? You make that deal?
I'd make that deal.
I don't blame you. Damn good deal.
And now, drum roll please for the trade I cooked up to launch us into a new NBA timeline and reality. Obviously, we have Paul George and Russell Westbrook headed north to join the Raptors as everyone expected, but the real story is what is coming back to Oklahoma City in Pascal Siakam, Kyle Lowry, and Serge Ibaka along with 4 Toronto first-round picks to the Thunder. The Raptors get their guys and most importantly are able to eventually re-sign Kawhi Leonard as they will try to bring back-to-back titles to Toronto. The Thunder still get a centerpiece young player in this deal in Pascal Siakam, a large amount of draft capital, and then 2 veteran players on expiring deals who could be kept around or easily flipped to another team for even more assets. So we made the alternate multiverse trade that prompted this what-if question and rabbit hole deep dive, but now what happens to all the parties impacted by this deal happening instead of the one we saw between the Thunder and the Clippers, which actually occurred in reality? Who suffers the most from these events occurring differently, and who comes out the better in this new trade reality? Let's start in Oklahoma City, where the current iteration of the Young Thunder that we know today could never have been possible. Shai is obviously not on the team without the Clippers trade. J-Dub and Chet are both up in the air, with Chet being the Thunder's own pick and J-Dub being selected with one of the many Clippers picks that went to OKC. Pascal Siakam slides into Shai's spot as a young player with a nice upside, although being much older than Shai was at the time of the trade. However, he's still a potential building block for Presti or a player that could potentially have their value increase before extending his deal and then flipping him to another team for more assets to bolster the Thunder's rebuilding arsenal. The Raptors in October of 2019 extended Spicy P on a 4-year deal worth $130 million. I think the same extension or something similar still would have been signed after he was traded to the Thunder. Serge Ibaka comes over mostly a salary filler and a veteran presence, returns to where his career started, and most importantly is on an expiring deal that you could just let play out or flip him to another team. Finally, the obvious Chris Paul and Kyle Lowry parallels. Lowry is not the same level of player that CP3 was, but OKC would get another elite floor general, leader, and culture setter for a season to set the table and set the tone for a Thunder franchise in flux. As previously mentioned, that iteration of the Thunder did have Chris Paul, who's a much better player, but was much harder to trade just based on his trade value at the time that I think people forget just how bad it was with his giant deal. So I think that Lowry would be much easier to flip, as he was also in an expiring deal compared to Paul's contract at the time, which was looked at as a major negative asset when OKC acquired him. Post-new trade, the Thunder's full roster going into the 2019-20 season would probably look something like this, with Pascal Siakam, Kyle Lowry, Serge Ibaka, Steven Adams, Dennis Schroeder, Andre Robertson, Terrence Ferguson, Darius Bazley, Hamidou Diallo, Mike Muscala, Abdul Nader, Nerlens Noel, and Deontay Burton. There are a couple of wildcards, with Lou Dort already being signed to a two-way deal before this trade took place, so he could still be on that deal and later converted, as we saw actually happen during his rookie season. The other question lies with Jeremy Grant, who was traded away to the Nuggets later that offseason in a tongue-in-cheek way. To quote Grant, "I still think the Thunder trade him away from the quote-unquote sinking ship as they pivot into a new direction."
Why you pouring me? I'm right.
Although the circumstances are similar, with OKC having a young player with a lot of potential, some solid vets on the roster, and a lot of draft capital, in this instance, I think it still more than likely still ends with an OKC rebuild, but in this go-around, Presti, in my estimation, probably hits the reset button a year earlier than he did in reality, waiting until after the bubble to wipe the slate clean for OKC. Whether it is before the season begins, during it, or at the trade deadline, I think the Thunder would look to move off the likes of Lowry, Serge, Adams, Schroeder, and more in an attempt to get into the top of the 2020 NBA draft and potentially find their next cornerstone star or a player to pair with Siakam. The top of that draft would have been really interesting to see how Presti would have operated with at the time the consensus top three being Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman, and Lamelo Ball. We all know the player that Ant would end up becoming, but at the time of the draft, there was some skepticism about his game and work ethic. He matches up pretty well with the first iteration of Thunder players as a profile, as an extremely athletic player with a lot of raw tools that, if molded correctly, would give him an unreal high ceiling as a player. James Wiseman, not just because he was a bust and we are looking at things with the benefit of hindsight, I don't think would be a Presti or Thunder guy, just given his lack of feel and processing speed, which was completely exposed during his time with the Warriors. Lamelo is honestly the most interesting of the three for me, with him really falling in line with the modern mold of a Presti guy or new age Thunder basketball player, and a guy who can dribble, pass, and shoot while also having great feel, processing speed, size for position, long arms, and high basketball IQ. I don't think the go-kart intel on Lamelo was available at the time of the draft, which could have prompted some concern, but for this exercise, let's just say the Thunder end up with Lamelo in 2020. OKC goes into that next season led by Siakam and Lamelo, but I think they still keep the big picture in mind and try to position themselves the best they can to maximize their lottery odds in an attempt to acquire high-end talent towards the top of that draft. The 2021 NBA draft was lauded for its star-studded class led by Cade Cunningham, who was the consensus #1 overall pick. Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, and Jalen Suggs were all right behind Cade as the premier 4 prospects in the draft, which many experts stated were all #1 overall pick-worthy talents as prospects coming into the league. This is where we get to another fork in the road. Let's say the Thunder somehow luck into another top 3 pick in this draft. According to Shams Charania, during the actual 2021 draft, the Thunder made multiple offers to the Cavaliers in an attempt to trade up for Evan Mobley. I don't have many reasons to believe this report was false, and I think whether it is by trade up or just staying at their slot in the top 3, that OKC in this timeline comes out of the 2021 NBA draft with their big man of the future in Evan Mobley. So hypothetically, going into the 2022 NBA season, you would be pairing a 20-year-old Lamelo Ball with a 20-year-old Evan Mobley, while also having Pascal Siakam, who was 25 at the time. This to me is a pivot point. For all the stupid conversations a few years ago about the Thunder trading Shai because he quote-unquote didn't match their timeline, I think that view would actually apply here with Siakam. Although a really good player, Spicy P I think would occupy too much of the same space as Mobley would ideally be slotted into, as OKC tries to develop him into their franchise big or even centerpiece star. Siakam at the time for the Raptors made second team All-NBA. Obviously that wouldn't occur for the Thunder, just given their likely win total would limit his All-NBA voting consideration, but still, him at 25 with a new deal likely inked for at least 3 more years on a reasonable salary of $30-ish million a year annually, I think would have a lot of interest from other teams, and he could bring back some really nice value to continue stocking the Thunder's cupboard of future assets. 2022 is the Chet draft and the final draft that I'll look into in my crystal ball and try to guess what might have happened in this alternate reality for the Thunder. I think the Thunder's luck runs out in this one and they fall out of the top 5 even after trading Siakam and the extra wins that he would have added to the Thunder. Let's say they place at 6 or 7. Whether Presti would stay at that spot or trade back, I think J-Dub ending up on the Thunder again, even in this timeline, is pretty realistic. Dub was already a pretty late riser who really made waves during that combine, and even when he was picked at 12, it was seen by some as a reach, but we know Presti is not afraid to go off the board and take a player if he grades them out higher than the consensus. So out is the trio of Shai, Chet, and Dub, and in is the alternate timeline building block big three of Lamelo, Mobley, and Dub. Not too bad, but still not as good as the current young OKC 3 combo in terms of top-end talent, synergy among the trio, but you could definitely do worse in a 3-year draft cycle. I don't think Lamelo has the superstar upside that we have seen from Shai, and Chet already I think has eclipsed Mobley in a lot of people's eyes, and I think J-Dub and Dub are pretty much a wash in terms of talent. If all this did happen, this would be far from a bad outcome, with OKC ending up teaming Lamelo, Mobley, and Dub up together as the building blocks for their future. A ton of teams would probably kill to have that as their foundation to build off of, but the Thunder are one of the few exceptions. I'm pretty confident that OKC would prefer to keep who they have now in our current reality with Shai, Chet, and Dub, rather than rolling the dice on this alternate reality timeline big three if they had the choice. So the Thunder in this multiversal trade timeline come out on the short end of the stick compared to what we know actually would end up occurring that we are seeing playing out today. We now go north to Toronto, where the Raptors, coming off a title led by Mr. Fun Guy himself, managed to pull off a deal that would add Paul George and Russell Westbrook to their team as Masai Ujiri tries to build his team around a new big three. From what I could find, there hasn't been a defending NBA champion to add a player who's made an All-NBA team during the year prior, since the Rockets traded for Clyde Drexler during the 94-95 season on their way to back-to-back rings. The Raptors would not only add one, but two players coming off an All-NBA team in Russell Westbrook and Paul George to the reigning champs roster led by Finals MVP Kawhi Leonard. I think Toronto has a real chance to go back-to-back in the finals. We all saw what happened to Kawhi and PG in the bubble, blowing a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets, but in an East where the Celtics were still coming into their own, the Bucks lost in round 1 to the Heat, who would have been a really interesting matchup for the Raptors deep in the East playoffs, and who knows, like I said, maybe they go back-to-back, but 2020, hands down, is their best shot with this trio. I think the injury bugs, along with Father Time, still more than likely catches up and bites the Kawhi, George, and Russ big three in the end anyway, and limits their opportunities to make deep playoff runs in the years after that, like we saw happen to George and Kawhi for the Clippers, where they started delivering lottery picks to OKC while struggling with the injuries of their most important and highest paid players. I'm not sure if Masai would go back and change things to make this trade instead of standing firm as he did in reality in 2019. Although the Raptors do have a nice young piece in Scotty Barnes, they are in sort of the no man's land of the middle, which is the worst part of the NBA to be in. I guess I would personally say I would rather have the chance of Kawhi and another ring, or that blowing up in my face and having to rebuild, rather than what Toronto has today, where it's going to be a real challenge and take some major luck of a breakout from one of their guys to get back to being a team who finds themselves knocking on the door of contention in the conversations for the East. Lastly are the Clippers, who in this multiversal alternate timeline dodged the disaster that ended up being that Paul George trade, but they did end up keeping Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and all of their picks. The Clippers are essentially running it back with their roster from the season before in 18-19, and I think take a step back from being an 8 seed in a deep West, and likely are in the bottom 5 of their conference the next season. Steve Ballmer has shown beyond a willingness to spend since he bought the team, so I'm doubtful that right after paying $2 billion for the Clippers that he would immediately want to go into the tank by doing a fire sale of most, if not all, of the veterans on the team. We fast forward to the 2020 NBA Draft Lottery, and let's say that puts them around 8 to 10. On one hand, they have Jerry West in their front office and just drafted Shai, but also right after Shai, they took Jerome Robinson, so I think there's an equal chance they will nail it or whiff on this pick. Tyrese Haliburton was available, but we know he told a couple of teams with point guards such as the Hawks not to draft him, so I'm flipping a coin between Devin Vassell and Aaron Nesmith. It's heads, and congrats to the Clips on pairing Shai with Devin Vassell. The Clippers go into 2021 and are at a crossroads themselves. Do they want to commit to a tank for a chance at Cade, Green, Mobley, and Suggs, or do they opt to try to be competitive? This is where I'm going to have some fun, because I think they will ultimately choose to make a win-now move and trade for none other than Pascal Siakam for the Thunder. At this time, the Clippers picks are burning a hole in Ballmer's pocket, and he needs some wins. The Thunder, as I mentioned earlier, probably think to pivot away and trade Siakam at the height of his value, and let's say the Clippers give up 2 firsts with light protections to OKC along salary filler. The Clippers, with a 3-man core of Shai, Vassell, and Siakam, I think could be a very competitive team year in and year out, but the question is, do you think the Clippers would go back and take this alternate reality path, or do you think they would take another chance on Kawhi and George and hope that the two can stay healthy enough to hopefully go on a finals run? Similar to the Raptors, I think I would opt to go with George and Kawhi while I cross my fingers and count my lucky stars and hope for the best that these two stars can string together one healthy deep playoff run. I do think there is more of a runway with a hypothetical Shai, Vassell, and Siakam trio, but I'm not sure that that three-man combo has the highest ceiling to really contend hypothetically at the level that George and Kawhi probably should have for at least one season in LA. So I'm going to take the risk, roll the dice, and go with that big two again, and just hope for better luck. But what do you think? Are you happy with the current reality we are living in that was set in motion by the Paul George for Shai trade? Would you rather explore this alternate reality I laid out today? Who are the biggest winners and losers from PG not going to Toronto? And what other Thunder what-ifs would you like me to explore? And finally, if you enjoyed what you saw today, make sure to leave a like on this video, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to my channel so I can keep making fun videos like this. And until next time, thanks for watching.